Mike Benz, I want to bring you on. I wanted to get your sort of assessment and scoop of everything that happened this morning with John Bolton and why you think he is, potentially of interest, shall we say, to law enforcement.
We don't have any details about what the raid entailed, but given the dispute between John Bolton and the Trump administration around the potentially classified information in John Bolton's book that John Bolton put in there against the disputes of the Trump administration, it's quite possible. I think the leading theory of the raid is that there may be classified information at his home, and that this was, in a way, kind of similar to the kind of raids that the Biden administration was doing on Trump officials for that sort of thing. But John Bolton is quite an interesting character to be. If that is indeed what happened, it's a bit ironic given that John Bolton had made those accusations against President Trump of mishandling classified documents. And there is a question, if that is indeed the case, if that is what the raid was about. There is the question of potential prosecutions. And I just want to make this point up front, which is that there is the same problem with prosecutions of blob officials who have committed criminal wrongdoing in D.C., which is the D.C. jury pool. And I believe that if Donald Trump, if President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance put out a call for 100,000 people who are centrist or independent or conservative to move to Washington, D.C., in order to change the composition of D.C. jury pools, it would only take about 100,000 people to substantially change D.C. jury pools. I'm living in Washington, D.C. now. I've lived here several times. It's always been a 95% Democrat city, which means it's always been a 95% Democrat jury pool, which means it's very difficult to actually hold uniparty officials responsible for crimes. We saw this in the classified documents case about Joe Biden himself. If folks recall, while the Justice Department was doing the pre-dawn raid of Mar-a-Lago and indicting President Trump for mishandling classified documents, the Justice Department then suffered a very embarrassing quandary, which was that then sitting President Joe Biden was found to have had classified documents at his home and had mishandled them too. And then Special Prosecutor Robert Hur argued in a memo that the Justice Department should not bring the case against President Biden, even though he had committed the same alleged underlying crime as President Trump, because a D.C. jury would find that he would be senile and genteel and would not want him to send him away to spend his final days in a prison cell. So it was the same crime, the same facts of the case, but one person got indicted and the other person didn't, just because of the issue of the jury pool. So I believe if the Trump administration can turn D.C. into Miami, so to speak. Miami recently turned red in the past 4 years. It's Miami-Dade County is now a red county. If there can be a call, an immigration to D.C., if for nothing else, to help the Justice Department be able to actually bring justice to Washington, D.C., I think that would move mountains.
And speaking of the DOJ, I know it's just sort of breaking, but that they released the transcript of Todd Blanche's interview with Ghislaine Maxwell. Of course, the media focusing in that the DOJ did ask her about President Trump's potential connections to Epstein, which she repeatedly said there were none. She never saw him receive a massage or do anything, shall we say, untoward. But I'm curious, you've been sort of going through it. I've been seeing your ex. What's your sort of assessment of what's contained there?
One thing that's fascinating is she point blank tells the Justice Department, quote, "I was part of the beginning process of the Clinton Global Initiative." And then she goes on to say that she believes Jeffrey Epstein actually funded the Clinton Global Initiative and that they came up with the idea together while on a trip to Davos. Now, we know that this lines up with the exact start of the Clinton Foundation. In 2002 was exactly when Jeffrey Epstein was flying President Clinton around personally as kind of aerial chauffeur around Africa. I think they went to 5 different countries in Africa together publicly. And this was actually part of the process that I think brought Jeffrey Epstein a little bit too close to the sun was when he was personally flying President Clinton around while President Clinton was setting up the Clinton Foundation. And we know that what the Clinton Foundation was doing was essentially pay to play while Hillary Clinton was making her rise in New York Senate politics and then into the Secretary of State, and while they had all this clout and connections and pull within the Democrat Party, that they could essentially sell U.S. foreign policy to foreign donors and to big corporations so that they could essentially, instead of doing things in the national interest, have the State Department, the Defense Department, the CIA, USAID, essentially twist the governance and policies of foreign countries using the battering ram of the American diplomacy and war and trade machine in order to profit the people who personally paid the Clintons for those favors. And so this is totally in line with what I think is the most persuasive theory of the case on Epstein, which is that he was a money bundler. He helped in the structuring of these complex faux philanthropic influence machines. He was a deal maker, and it looks like he was part of the deal making that went into the origins of the Clinton Foundation, which we're now learning as well. The Justice Department shut down the FBI investigation into 3 different FBI investigations into the Clinton Foundation were shut down, and the IRS investigation was shut down. We're told now because the IRS claimed they did not have enough resources to investigate the Clinton Foundation. Evidently, the fraud there was so massive. The IRS's defense to get out of political cronyism is that I guess the fraud was too big to jail. They simply couldn't take it on.
And Mike, I want to sort of bring this back to the broader discussion, I think, of how these foreign governments are sort of co-opting a lot of our domestic policy. Obviously, on the censorship front, we've seen the UK do a lot there. But yesterday we ran out of time, but you had some updates on how foreign governments are sort of exploiting some censorship loopholes, or there's some movement on that front?
Yes, this is now escalating dramatically. See, what happened was this started as a transatlantic censorship apparatus. It grew out of NATO initially as a response to losing Crimea in eastern Ukraine, and then it moved westward to Western Europe after the Brexit referendum, and then it moved finally to the United States in 2016 when Donald Trump won in that same DOD, CIA, USAID, State Department network brought that apparatus to the United States. But as we've gotten more and more victories here in the United States against the censorship machine, as we have cracked down on the funding arms and the funding spigots from the U.S. government, hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think the audience should be mindful of this. We've achieved huge wins in just 7 months in the Trump administration, cutting hundreds of millions of dollars out of the NGOs and pressure cookers in the private sector that were pushing the tech companies to censor people. And so if you've experienced a lot more freedom on the internet lately, it's not just because of Elon Musk, although he played the indispensable role in this, undoubtedly, but there's much less pressure on Facebook and on YouTube and on other organs from the U.S. government. The response to this from the censors in exile in the United States and their allies in ruling governments around the world has been to internationalize the issue, to take it upstream of the United States to the international community. And what they're now plotting, and which has gone into effect, and we're now seeing the beginning volleys of, are you have foreign countries asserting global jurisdiction over websites on the internet in countries far, far away. So right now, the UK is actually fining the website 4chan $20,000 a day. So you add that up over a year, and this is very serious money. 4chan is a U.S. website. It has nothing to do with the UK. This might as well be on the moon. If 4chan was operated on a military base on the surface of the moon, imagine the UK government fining it for allowing speech that Brits can access through a VPN. This is a way of getting long-arm jurisdiction over American speech. And make no mistake, this was the plan from the beginning. The UK Digital Ministry and the UK Foreign Office as well as their little honchos and MI6 and the UK Ministry of Defense, sent over a delegation to the Biden administration and personally briefed them on how they can work together to censor their mutual opponents on both sides of the Atlantic. America First Legal, Stephen Miller and Gene Hamilton's legal shop, did an amazing job getting access to these documents. They explicitly plotted to censor American speech with foreign censorship laws. And the American censors in exile are champing at the bit as a way for them to get their old jobs back in the censorship industry and their old funding back from the government funding mechanisms that allowed them to do this all with our money. So this is now happening in the UK. It's happening in the EU through the EU Digital Services Act, and it's happening in Brazil. And this is now, it's gone beyond what we can do within our own borders to stop internet censorship. This is now a job for the State Department and for our international influence branch in order to stop the enforcement of this through tariffs, sanctions, security policy renegotiations. I believe we may need to threaten leaving NATO if this escalates.
Mike, if you can hang with us through the break, perfect pause, but I want to double down on that. We'll be right back. So sort of wrap up directionally where you think we're going on the Bolton front, what you think we need to really be paying attention to, and you can sort of wrap up your censorship thoughts.
What's happening on the John Bolton front? Remember, he was the National Security Advisor as well. He was also the head of policy and budget for USAID, fascinatingly. John Bolton was also the person who almost single-handedly, well, I guess he had a little help from his friends, but he played a major part in getting us involved in the Iraq War, reportedly threatened the head of the OPCW, the chemical weapons folks who tried to bring Iraq into that in order to try to, he ousted them, ousted the head of that, threatened his family and children in order to ensure that the U.S. had a war predicate to get the U.S. into the Iraq War. But a lot of this comes down to the restructuring and accountability of the intelligence community, which, of course, as the National Security Advisor, John Bolton was the senior official over that whole portfolio. And what we saw this week as well was the ODNI director, Tulsi Gabbard, announcing a massive restructuring of ODNI, laying off 40%, I believe, of the staff within ODNI and dramatically downscaling and narrowing its role, citing bureaucratic bloat and a departure from its core mission. I think a lot of folks, when they initially saw that ODNI was going to have a massive staff reduction, saw that as being a kind of reduction of her powers. This, I believe, came from Senator Tom Cotton, who's the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee currently. But this does appear to be the thing that Tulsi wanted, and you can see how, to the extent that ODNI is obstructed from the inside by a vast bureaucratic class who is not carrying out orders, who is working across purposes, that this could be a way to really streamline the efficiency as they continue their dig transparency effort. But at the end of the day, you basically have three methods of accountability. You have mass terminations, you have defunding, you have declassifications, and then I guess the fourth would be the criminal arrests. And I do want to stress that while we've made so many strides in reforms to these government institutions, at the end of the day, the Justice Department, it does need to deal with that D.C. jury phenomenon. And I just want to reiterate to any members of the administration who are listening that I do believe a public call to stack D.C. with conservatives so that the jury pool is even and you have a fair fight is really the only way to arm the Justice Department with the support that it needs within the community of peers of these national security officials who've gone rogue, so that they actually get a fair trial and not a rigged one where they will be declared innocent and the even having committed crimes, and the DOJ will be permanently hamstrung. This is the problem when you have all of these federal government offices headquartered in D.C., and D.C. is the home turf of blobsters. I think if there was essentially a kind of jobs program or something to entice people to move to D.C. to change that phenomenon, you would have a completely different administration of justice in terms of our federal offices.
Mike Benz, as always, thank you for laying everything out for us. If people want to follow you and stay up to date with everything you're working on, where can they go to do that?
Follow me on X at Mike Benz Cyber, also on Rumble and YouTube.
Thank you, sir, for joining us.